Hello, I'm Michael Mayer from VocalWisdom.com, and in this video we're going to talk about the pitfalls of vocal technique. I think a good place to start would be my definition of what technique is. I always think of technique as being that concept that we envision in our mind of how and what we're doing with our body to get it to do the things that we want the voice to do. Whether it's something to do with the breathing, or something to do with how we form the mouth, or whatever the case might be. That's what I think of technique. And a general rule of thumb I try to adhere to is that whatever technical concept that we're thinking of, it's important that it correspond to what the natural functioning of the body is. So oftentimes what we are taught is just sort of kind of the technique, and we don't understand the underlying functional principle that technique is meant to address, is meant to influence, or is meant to stimulate, which is basically what we're doing. We're trying to stimulate certain responses, certain natural behaviors in our body, our nervous system, in order to activate the voice to do our vocalizing and singing. Okay, so with that basic idea in mind, the pitfalls that go along with that are really can kind of be an endless list. But some of the things that you may notice, or that I have definitely noticed over the years, is anytime we try to do one thing, more often than not, if not immediately, fairly soon after some period of time, that starts to break down. That's why so often we hear people say, or we might even have this feeling ourselves, that something worked for a little while, but then it didn't work. That technical idea didn't continue to work, or I feel like I keep going around in a circle where I'm working on one thing, and then I go around and I notice something else, and I'm starting to do that again, and now all of a sudden I'm experiencing something that I used to experience, and it's a big circular problem that never really seems to get worked out. And this is all related to the concept that I often hear singers come to me with. I could do things this way, or I could do things this other way. It's sort of like either this way or that way, and which way is correct. And I wrote a blog post about this several years ago, where there's even a YouTube video about this, where whenever we have sort of this situation, which is really all the time, we can either do things one way or we can do things a different way. The answer usually is some combination of both. Because what happens is we're dealing with our body. Our body is a part of nature, and things that are in nature are never really singular. They're usually some sort of a duality. There's usually some sort of duality to it, and duality is what creates balance. So just like a really big one is night and day. These are very large elements in our life, our daily life. Darkness and lightness. These things they balance us. We experience light. We experience dark. In our body, all our muscular systems to create movement are set up in a dual nature. We usually and again, our brain tends to think in a sense of singularity, right? We go work out and we go do bicep curls, and because we're thinking of this one muscle, and then we do extensions where we're working the tricep. But the thing is that both of these muscles are working in both of those exercises, and both of those, to bend the arm, we think this is a bicep issue, but really the tricep muscle group is controlling is balancing the contraction of the bicep as we bend the arm. And this is true throughout the whole body. All of the joints are and to move the limbs around the joints, they're controlled by not just one muscle. They're controlled by partnerships of muscles and groups of muscles, different muscles, in order to coordinate well-balanced and well-controlled movements. So the same principles apply when we're talking about using the voice. Most of us have been taught, at least in some way, about using the breath to vocalize. And there's definitely, obviously, there's truth to that. The breathing is a major component of activating the voice. But the thing is that if we only use the breath, we're almost guaranteeing ourselves to be out of balance. Because if we only use the breath, there's no coordinated opposite factor, something that's countering it to keep it in balance. And what's meant to be there is, as I always talk about, is the larynx. The role of the larynx, the voice box, is meant to be a partner with the breathing so that they work against each other, but they work against each other in a coordinated way, just like the tricep is working against the bicep, but it's doing it in a coordinated way so that they're not, if like we tense and we kind of create a competition, then that's obviously counterproductive. In the same way that if we tense the larynx or we stiffen or we push things together, we can create kind of a conflicted relationship. So we really want to be aware that everything we do, and that's what I mean by, in the answer to that question, either this or that, the answer is both. We need to learn how to coordinatedly utilize both of these seemingly opposite elements, whatever they might be. In this case, the voice and the breath seem to be opposite things, but they need to learn to work in a partnership, learn to work cooperatively. And that's what kind of coordination and cooperative are basically the same premise. So then you can go into things like the breathing itself. We hear a lot of people talk about support, and that support, you may have heard like some people talk about support is different than breathing, which is true. But the thing is that we use our breathing system to do it. And what is support? I don't really like to use the term support because it doesn't really have any meaning in and of itself. And a lot of people mean different things by that term, so it gets really confusing. But if we look at the breathing system and how it behaves, it starts out as a respiratory system, meaning we inhale and exhale with it. But singing isn't really accomplished on just basic breathing. As I've explained in other lessons, when we breathe, the glottis opens, the vocal cords open to allow the breath to pass through, in and out, for respiration. That is kind of counterproductive to the vocalizing action, which really is most optimally done with the glottis in basically a closed position. But again, we don't want to be squeezing it or anything. So the glottis closes when we stop breathing. So that starts to get into more detail than what the purpose of this lesson really is about. But the main idea is understanding the cooperation of the inhale and the exhale to coordinate that sequence in order to first be able to stop in the inhale so that the glottis closes itself. And also, when that happens, I like to describe this as having an inflated balloon inside of us. And when we're in that condition, then the air is essentially under compression. So now we've transformed from a respiratory system, which is inhaling and exhaling. we've transformed into a compression system, which then now it's not about getting the air out and in. It's about creating a balanced air pressure to make the vocal cords vibrate. A lot like how a trumpet player makes their lips vibrate. They're not blowing the air through their lips, because that wouldn't buzz and create tone when connected to the trumpet. They're trying to get the lips to buzz, and there's various ways to buzz it. When we do lip rolls or lip buzzes, we're doing a version of that. Those lip vibrations are larger than what a trumpet player might use. They're more like maybe what a tuba player or something like that. So the size of the vibration corresponds to the size of the mouthpiece and the size of the instrument. So the vocal cords are very much like the lips in that sense. And so what we're trying to do is coordinate it so that so that we can get the vocal lips, as Lamperti like to call them, to vibrate in a nice, true, pure sort of way, rather than rather than opening them up with the exhale and then getting them to vibrate with the flow of air that's going past them. That lacks a great deal of efficiency, and so that is not really the way our systems are designed to most efficiently and most optimally function. So inhale and exhale, balancing that was termed the vocal struggle, la lotte vocale, the vocal struggle, the vocal contest, depending on how you want to translate that traditional statement. So that all depends on how you want to translate that, but the basic idea is that we are coordinating the inhale and exhale gestures so that the inhale is like what I like to describe, keeping the balloon inflated. The exhale is kind of compressing that. So it's got this two-way activity going on. The same thing with the glottis in terms of we want release. So there's a feeling of releasing. I've talked about this in a different lesson about releasing the breath or releasing the tone and keeping the breath. This is another Lamperti concept where he stated, don't hold the voice, hold the breath and release the voice, hold the breath and release the tone, spin the tone, in other words. Because what happens is when we start trying to release, a lot of times what happens is we start releasing the breath. So learning how to coordinate this so that we aren't holding the tone when we're actually should be basically holding the breath, meaning keeping the breath under the voice. But releasing the tone and not releasing the breath when we release the tone. Figuring out that's one of the most challenging, I think, steps to finding balance, is figuring out how to basically retain the breath so that it feeds the vocalization, but still release the tone so that we don't trap. That's why it's so important that we get a good flexible jaw and get that jaw opening to release the tone and not trap it with the throat. You could kind of go through just about any technical concept that you've been taught or that you've read or you learned and look at it kind of with a critical viewpoint and try to figure out, okay, where is the pitfall here? So when you're trying to do something, where is the risk of overdoing it because I'm not taking into consideration some counterbalancing opposite element? That's the key to really learning how to master your instrument. It's not just about learning a technique or even learning the holy grail of the perfect technique, Because if you don't understand the balancing act that goes along with that, then the technique doesn't matter, because you're going to be doing something that without the understanding of what that doing is trying to elicit from your body. So what's another one we can think of? Well, I just talked about opening the jaw. Okay, so it's important that we open the jaw so that we can release the tone and not trap it and get oh. Now the thing is that that's dependent on having a pure vibration in the vocalization. So oftentimes people keep the mouth and the jaw a little bit more closed because the vibration is not secure inside the larynx. So like if we had so if I close the jaw, now this vibration has more purity, because by closing the jaw, what would be relaxed has now found a better balance. But what happens if I open the jaw? It goes airy, because now not only is the tone being released, the vocalization isn't secure, so the breath is now being released also. So that's exactly what I'm talking about in terms of we need to have each part be secure in itself. And I basically think of there being three key component parts to our vocal instrument. We have the breathing, we have the voice itself here in the larynx, which has the vibration. So the breathing creates air pressure, which we utilize to feed the vibration that happens inside here, the larynx. Then we have the resonance, which is the amplification and the radiance of the sound that's coming from the vibration. Because if you've ever played a really good example is I've used before is an electric guitar that's not plugged in. If you just play the strings, you can hear how little sound is created by the strings themselves. So it's really the acoustic property of the hollow body of the guitar, of an acoustic guitar, that really gives the tone. So an electric guitar doesn't have any acoustic properties. That's why it has to be plugged in. It's designed to be plugged in and to be amplified through electronic amplification, versus the acoustic amplification of an acoustic guitar, which we see in stringed instruments and we see in most other instruments also, which the voice qualifies as an acoustic instrument. Even if we put a microphone in front of it, we're still acoustically amplified, and then that acoustic amplification is amplified again with the electric amplification of the microphone and the speakers and such. So keeping the mouth more closed is just a compensation, trying to keep a more pure vibration in the voice by keeping this more closed. Instead of having a secure vocalization in itself. And like I described earlier, the feeling of the inhale-exhale balance and coordinating that's the job of the breathing system, to find that kind of that equalization, so that it's not just collapsing and letting the air out, which will then disrupt the pure vibration of the voice. And lacking a pure vibration, we don't get, there's no air pressure when the glottis is opening. So that's why we have to exhale to make up for that. So it's more like a good coordination is more like taking an inflated balloon and then just manipulating the valve to let the air out as it vibrates. So you're utilizing less pressure, just using the intrinsic pressure of the recoil and the air that's inside of us. So there's no real attempts to get the air out. The air comes out just as a natural property of the condition we've created. If we open the glottis, and I just try to use that same principle, it doesn't work, because when the glottis opens, the pressure inside the body disappears. And so then there's not enough pressure to make the voice vocalize. It's just kind of whispered. So that's when we start having to now we have to start pushing the air out actively through the exhale. And it makes the voice vocalize more, but basically we're pushing or forcing the voice. So that is now a lack of balance, because we're forcing the air out in order to get the voice to vocalize. So it's really good coordination is so dependent on, one, understanding what balance means in the different parts of the instrument, and then practicing and developing our skill to keep that coordination, to keep those balance conditions in the various parts of the instrument, and not only in the part itself, but balance between the parts. So like the balance between the voice and the breathing, and a balance between the resonator and the voice. So all of these have a sense of balance within themselves, and they have a balance between each other. So I hope that kind of gives you some more insight into the potential of the instrument, and some maybe deeper understanding of how to accomplish this balance that I keep talking about. And if you like this video, share it with your Facebook friends, or email it to whoever you know. Leave me a comment or a question, either on the blog or on the YouTube channel, or on Facebook, wherever you happen to be watching this. Okay, so hope to hear from you soon, and we'll talk again. Thanks.